If you enjoyed this interesting video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you even more exciting and thought-provoking content. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. Join our growing community today. Your feedback, comments, and ideas truly keep this channel alive.
Makoko of the Teke, Guardian of the Congo River Kingdom. Chapter 1: The Rise of the Makoko. The Congo River winds through dense forests and wide plains, a living artery that carried people, trade, and stories for centuries. Along its banks, the Teke people built their kingdom, ruled by a sacred monarch known as the Makoko. To the Teke, the Makoko was more than a political ruler. He was a figure chosen by the ancestors, a leader whose authority reached beyond the battlefield into the spiritual heart of the nation. By the 19th century, this kingdom had grown into a regional power, and the Makoko had become one of Central Africa's most important rulers. The 19th century brought both opportunity and danger. The Teke were skilled traders who controlled routes connecting the interior to the Atlantic coast. Ivory, copper, salt, cloth, and other goods passed through their lands. The Makoko's palace, decorated with carved wood and fine fabrics, stood as a symbol of wealth earned from this trade. But the same routes also drew new threats: neighboring kingdoms eager for control, rival traders from the coast, and eventually European explorers who looked at the Congo River not as a lifeline for its people but as a doorway to empire. Among the Teke of this period was Makoko Elui, a strong and strategic leader. He inherited a land where loyalty was not guaranteed but had to be won. His rule depended on his ability to command warriors in battle, to secure alliances, and to keep trade flowing. Like many African rulers of the 19th century, he balanced tradition with change. Rituals tied him to the spirits of the ancestors, but the pressure of new weapons, new enemies, and foreign powers forced him to adapt. From the beginning, Elui showed the qualities of a commander. Witnesses recalled how he would stand at the front of his warriors, his presence alone enough to steady their courage. His army carried spears and shields decorated with patterns that spoke of clan identity. War drums echoed through the forest, announcing his command. When he raised his arm, the warriors advanced in rhythm, running together like a single wave. The Makoko was not hidden behind his men. His face, fierce and determined, was visible to all. That was his way of saying, "I share your struggle, I lead from the front." His rise came at a time of conflict. The Teke were surrounded by rivals, some of whom wanted to disrupt their control over the Congo River trade. Skirmishes erupted often, and a ruler's strength was tested by his ability to defend villages, protect traders, and punish raiders. In these battles, Makoko Elui earned respect. Stories spread of how he charged alongside his warriors, running across the forest floor, his voice carrying above the clash of weapons. He was not only a fighter but a commander, skilled in giving orders that kept his men disciplined even in the heat of combat. Yet leadership was not only about fighting. The Makoko also had to command in moments of peace. He received envoys from neighboring chiefs and merchants who brought gifts in exchange for safe passage. He presided over rituals where sacrifices were offered to ensure the blessing of the ancestors. He sat in council, listening to disputes and delivering judgments that bound the Teke together. His rule was a mixture of spiritual duty and military power, one strengthening the other. But beyond the forests and plains of Teke land, the world was changing. New forces were pushing into Central Africa. On the Atlantic coast, European traders who had once focused on buying slaves were turning toward ivory and other resources. Explorers began mapping the Congo River, seeking to open it for colonial ambitions. Among them was Pierre Sévourien de Brazza, the French explorer whose journey upriver would forever alter the fate of the Teke. For now, though, the Makoko stood firm. His warriors trusted him. His people believed in him. He was both king and commander, a leader who fought, ran, and commanded with the confidence of one chosen by the ancestors. The Congo River carried whispers of his name downstream, a reminder that in the heart of Africa, a great ruler held the balance of trade, war, and tradition in his hands. The 19th century had only begun to test him, and the challenges ahead would not only decide his legacy but also reshape the future of his kingdom. Chapter 2: Command of the Warriors. When dawn broke over the Congo River, the forests were alive with sound. Birds called, drums echoed, and the steady movement of warriors prepared for battle. The Makoko, dressed in royal cloth with beads that reflected the morning sun, stepped forward. His face was calm but fierce, eyes sharp with the weight of command. To the Teke people, this was more than a king preparing his men. It was their protector, their commander, the spirit of the nation standing among them. The Teke warriors gathered in a wide circle around their ruler. Spears rose, shields thudded against the ground, and chants rolled like thunder. The Makoko lifted his hand, and the voices stilled. In the silence, he spoke words of fire and duty. He reminded them of the ancestors who had fought before, of the villages that depended on their strength, and of the Congo River that carried life through their lands. To fight for him was to fight for all that they were. His speeches carried power, not because of loudness but because every man knew he too would be at the front line. The Makoko's way of leading in battle was unlike that of rulers who stayed behind palace walls. He believed his face had to be seen. When he ran, his warriors ran. When he raised his spear, they lifted theirs. His commands were clear, given with sharp movements and steady signals. War drums matched the rhythm of his steps, guiding his army like a heartbeat. In this way, he commanded not only by words but by presence. The 19th century was an age of constant testing. Rival tribes and kingdoms eyed Teke wealth with envy. Caravans moving with ivory and copper made tempting targets, and raids threatened the stability of the trade networks. Each raid was more than a theft, it was a challenge to the Makoko's authority. To answer, he had to move quickly. Scouts carried news across the forests, and within hours warriors gathered, ready to march at his side. One of the most remembered clashes came near the river banks, where a rival force attempted to cut into Teke trade. The Makoko scouts had seen their fires at night, and by morning, his warriors stood ready. As the sun rose, spears flashed in the light. The Makoko stood at the front, his full face lit by the glow. He raised his hand, the signal to advance. The warriors surged forward, running with shields locked and spears angled. The ground shook under their charge. In the clash that followed, the Makoko proved himself not only a king but a seasoned commander. He moved through the lines, shouting commands, pointing out weak spots, and rallying men who faltered. His presence pushed them onward. At moments of danger, he was there, shield raised, spear driving forward. His warriors believed that to fight near him was to fight with the ancestors watching. The enemy broke under the weight of discipline and courage. When the dust settled, the riverbank was once again under Teke control. Victories like this built the Makoko's reputation. News of his strength spread along the Congo River, carried by traders and travelers. Stories of his face shining in battle, his voice carrying over the chaos, reached villages far beyond his lands. To allies, it was reassurance. To enemies, it was a warning. The Makoko's name was not just that of a ruler, it became a symbol of leadership. But leadership required more than victories. After each battle, the Makoko gathered his men not only to celebrate but to remember the cost. He honored the fallen with rituals, speaking their names so their spirits would be remembered. He distributed rewards to the brave, ensuring loyalty was bound not by fear but by respect. These acts deepened his bond with his warriors. They followed him not only because he commanded but because he cared for their lives and families. Still, challenges grew. The world outside was shifting. Traders from the coast whispered of new weapons, of Europeans pressing deeper into Africa, of alliances made and broken. The Makoko understood that battles with rivals were only one part of what was coming. He would soon face choices that would not be decided on the battlefield alone. For now, though, his warriors stood strong. The Congo River flowed as always, wide and eternal. The Makoko's command carried across its waters, his face remembered in every victory, his leadership etched into the hearts of those who marched beside him. The Makoko's face became known not only to warriors but to traders from afar. Stories spread of how he would appear at the riverbanks during large gatherings, standing tall with his staff of authority. His presence reminded all that the river was under his protection. Even those who had never seen him in battle spoke of his commanding presence, his piercing eyes, and the calm strength in his expression. Yet beneath this order, tension brewed. European ships were appearing more often along the Atlantic coast. Traders whispered of new goods, rifles, cloth, and liquor, that Europeans offered in exchange for ivory and palm oil. Some African rulers welcomed these exchanges, while others feared the growing influence. The Makoko listened carefully. He understood that the river was more than a road for wealth. It was now a road for strangers who might seek to rule rather than trade. One evening, as the sun fell over the Congo, the Makoko gathered his council. Warriors, elders, and traders filled the courtyard. The air was thick with smoke from torches and the smell of roasted food. The Makoko spoke of the future, warning that new powers were approaching. He urged unity, reminding his people that control of the river was their lifeline. If they lost it, they would lose their strength. His words carried the weight of both a king and a commander. In the days that followed, the Makoko strengthened his defenses. He ordered watchtowers built near key stretches of the river. He placed trusted men to oversee markets, and made sure no deal was struck without his approval. His leadership extended like the river itself, flowing through every village, every trade, every battle. The Congo River continued to flow, wide and endless. Canoes carried wealth downstream, and songs of the Teke echoed along its banks. But the Makoko knew that the river's calm surface hid the coming storms. Beyond the horizon, European explorers were moving inland, their eyes fixed on the very waters that sustained his kingdom. For now, though, the Makoko stood unshaken. His command of warriors, his control of trade, and his presence as a leader bound the Teke together. He was their shield, their voice, and their face, visible not only in battle but in every corner of their lives. The river carried his power, and through it, his people thrived. The strength of the Teke kingdom rested not only on the Congo River but also on the will of its ruler. Yet, in the 19th century, no ruler stood without rivals. The Makoko's prosperity drew envy, and his command over trade routes stirred conflict. Kingdoms nearby watched the steady stream of ivory, copper, and cloth flow under his authority, and many believed that by striking at the Teke, they could seize that wealth for themselves. The Makoko, however, was no stranger to rivalry. From the moment he took power, he knew that leadership meant standing firm against both open enemies and hidden threats. To the people of the Teke, their king was not just a voice of peace but a shield against attack. His warriors, loyal and disciplined, formed the backbone of that defense. It was in this time of tension that word reached the palace of a coalition forming along the northern frontier. Chiefs from neighboring groups had united, seeking to challenge Teke dominance. Scouts reported camps rising near the forest, fires burning at night, and armed men gathering in numbers too large to ignore. This was no small raid. It was a direct challenge to the Makoko's authority. The news spread quickly. Traders in the markets spoke in hushed voices, villagers looked to the horizon with worry, and warriors tightened their grip on spears. The Makoko wasted no time. He called his commanders to council. By torchlight, they gathered in the great hall. The air was thick with smoke and expectation. The Makoko rose, his presence silencing the room. His face, calm but firm, reflected both the burden and the power of leadership. He reminded his council that the Teke kingdom had endured because they stood together, never allowing rivals to divide them. "The river is ours," he declared. "The trade is ours. And no enemy will take from us what the ancestors have given." His words lit the room like fire, and the warriors answered with a unified roar. The Makoko moved quickly to prepare. Messengers were sent to outlying villages, calling warriors to arms. Drums carried the signal across the forests, a rhythm of urgency that echoed from one settlement to the next. Within days, the Makoko's army swelled with fighters. Spears gleamed in the sun, shields were painted with clan symbols, and chants filled the air as warriors gathered at the capital. When the time came to march, the Makoko did not remain in the palace. He stood at the head of his army, his face visible to all. His attire was both royal and practical, cloth wrapped tightly for movement, beads and ornaments that marked his status, and a spear in hand. To his men, he was not only a king but the first among them, ready to share the dangers of battle. The march through the forest was heavy with anticipation. Warriors moved in disciplined lines, their feet pounding the ground in rhythm with the drums. Scouts moved ahead, watching for enemy signs. At night, fires lit the camps, and the Makoko walked among his men, speaking to them directly. His presence reassured them, his words reminded them why they fought. He did not command from afar. He was there, his face in the firelight, his voice steady, his determination clear. The clash came at dawn near the edge of the forest, where open plains gave space for battle. The rival coalition had gathered in numbers, their war cries piercing the air. The Makoko's warriors formed ranks, shields locked, spears raised. The Makoko himself stood at the front, raising his arm to signal the advance. The drums thundered, and the Teke surged forward like a river in flood. The battle was fierce. Spears clashed, shields splintered, and the cries of men filled the air. The Makoko moved through the lines, directing his warriors, pointing where to strike, lifting those who faltered. His presence kept the army steady. Even in the thick of combat, his face was visible, a living symbol of courage. By midday, the enemy broke. The coalition, unable to withstand the discipline and unity of the Teke, scattered into the forest. Victory was clear. The Makoko's warriors raised their spears and shouted his name, their voices echoing across the plains. That victory secured more than the river. It reminded all who watched that the Makoko was a ruler not to be tested. His command was not only political but military, his authority proven on the battlefield. Rivals learned that wealth could not be stolen from the Teke, for it was guarded by a king who led like a commander and fought like a warrior. Back in the capital, celebrations filled the air. Drums beat, songs praised the ancestors, and the Makoko sat among his people, honored not just as their king but as the shield of their nation. Yet even as he celebrated, he knew that rivals would rise again. Leadership was not a single victory. It was a lifetime of vigilance. And beyond the forests and rivers, greater challenges were approaching, ones unlike any he had faced before. For generations, the Teke had ruled the river with confidence. Their king, the Makoko, commanded warriors in battle and traders in markets, his authority flowing like the Congo itself. Yet in the mid to late 19th century, whispers of strangers began to echo along the river. These were not rival chiefs or bands of raiders. They were men from across the ocean, Europeans, who came not as traders alone but as explorers, soldiers, and agents of empire. At first, their presence was distant, little more than rumors carried by coastal merchants. They brought rifles, strange fabrics, bottles of liquor, and polished trinkets. Some rulers along the coast welcomed their goods, others feared their motives. The Makoko listened carefully. To him, trade was familiar, but what he heard about the Europeans was troubling. They did not come simply to buy or sell. They sought to claim. By the late 1870s, the rumors grew sharper. Reports told of European expeditions pushing inland, mapping rivers, and signing treaties with local chiefs. One name in particular reached the Makoko's court, Pierre Savorgnan de Brazza, a French explorer. Brazza was known for his charm and patience, unlike other Europeans who relied on force. He moved upriver with a small party, offering gifts and promises. His goal was not simply to trade but to secure influence for France. The Makoko understood the danger. He gathered his council, elders, and commanders to discuss these new arrivals. The torchlit hall buzzed with arguments. Some urged him to welcome the Europeans, to gain their weapons and protection against rivals. Others warned that once the strangers took root, they would never leave. The Makoko listened to all sides, his face calm, his thoughts heavy. He knew that the choices he made would shape the fate of his people. One evening, he walked alone along the river bank. The Congo stretched before him, wide and endless, carrying both wealth and threat. He thought of his ancestors, of the battles fought to keep the Teke free, and of the warriors who trusted his leadership. To protect them, he would need more than spears and shields. He would need strategy, diplomacy, and the wisdom to see beyond appearances. When Brazza finally arrived in Teke lands in 1880, the meeting was one of history. The Makoko welcomed him with formality, as he would any powerful guest. Brazza presented gifts, cloth, rifles, and trinkets of European craft. He spoke of friendship, of protection, of peace under the French flag. He promised that France would guard the Teke against rivals and ensure trade would flourish. The Makoko studied him carefully. He saw the politeness, the careful smile, the soft words. Yet behind them, he sensed the weight of a greater power. France was not a single man but an empire, vast and unyielding. Accepting Brazza's offer could bring strength, but it could also mean surrender. The council debated fiercely. Some of the younger chiefs urged caution, but others saw opportunity. With European rifles, they argued, the Teke could dominate rivals for generations. The Makoko considered their words. His decision was not easy, for it meant choosing between immediate security and the risk of losing independence. In the end, history records that Makoko Aloi signed a treaty with the Brazza in 1880, placing his kingdom under French protection. The decision was made with the hope of securing peace and stability. The Makoko believed he was safeguarding his people from stronger enemies. Yet this moment would open the door for French colonization of Central Africa. Even after the treaty, the Makoko remained a visible commander. He continued to walk among his warriors, to lead rituals, to speak to his people. His face, strong and determined, reassured them that their king had not abandoned them. But deep inside, he knew the tides of power were shifting. The Congo River, once controlled only by African hands, now carried the ambitions of Europe. The people still sang his name, still looked to him for protection. But the Makoko understood that battles with rivals in the forest were no longer the greatest threat. A new era was beginning, one in which spears and shields would not be enough. The shadow of Europe had fallen across the Congo, and the Makoko stood at its edge, a commander facing an enemy unlike any he had ever known. The year was 1880. The Congo River shimmered under the sun, but its calm waters hid storms that were gathering. For the Teke, the river had always been theirs, a source of life, wealth, and power. But now Europeans were arriving with their papers, their promises, and their pens. What could not be taken by spear, they sought to claim with signatures. At the center of this turning point stood the Makoko. Pierre Sévorgnan de Brazza, the French explorer, entered Teke lands with confidence. His caravan carried rifles, cloth, liquor, and gifts meant to impress. He had come with a mission, to secure French control before rival Europeans, especially the Belgians under King Leopold, could do the same. Unlike others, Brazza did not storm in with soldiers. He smiled, he spoke gently, and he offered treaties that sounded like friendships. But every word carried the weight of empire. When Brazza stood before the Makoko, the meeting was both formal and tense. The Makoko sat with authority, surrounded by elders, warriors, and traders. His face was steady, his expression unreadable, but his eyes studied every detail. Brazza bowed and spoke of protection. He told the Makoko that France would guard the Teke against enemies, that trade would grow, that peace would last. He laid out the treaty with its sharp lines of ink, a document filled with promises. The Makoko listened, but his mind weighed heavy. He knew the river had become a prize in European eyes. Already, Belgian agents were moving inland, eager to seize land and resources. The Makoko understood that refusing Brazza might bring French hostility, while accepting him meant opening the door to foreign rule. It was a choice between fire and water, both dangerous, both unavoidable. His council debated deep into the night. Some elders urged rejection, warning that no foreigner offered help without cost. Others argued that with French protection, the Teke could secure their trade and protect themselves from rivals. The Makoko walked among them, silent, listening. When the debate ended, the final decision rested on his shoulders. The next morning, under the gaze of warriors and elders, the Makoko placed his mark upon the treaty. It was a moment heavy with meaning. The ink on that paper tied the Teke kingdom to France, turning allies into overseers and opening the path for French colonization. The Makoko signed with hope, for peace, for protection, for strength, but the true weight of the decision would be felt by generations to come. For the people, the signing was not the end of their trust in their king. They still looked to him as their commander, the face of their nation. In the days that followed, he stood before his warriors, spear in hand, reminding them that he had not abandoned them. He still walked among his people, leading rituals, guiding trade, and judging disputes. His presence reassured them. To see his face was to believe that the kingdom still stood strong. But in the quiet of his thoughts, the Makoko knew things had changed. The treaty was like fire. It could warm if controlled, but it could also burn if left unchecked. The French now claimed authority, and with time, they would press deeper into Teke lands, building stations, setting laws, and planting their flag. Even so, the Makoko was not a man to surrender easily. He began to adapt. He commanded his warriors to remain disciplined, not only for battle but as a show of strength. He taught his people to use new tools and goods brought by the French while holding fast to Teke traditions. He worked to ensure that his kingdom did not vanish under foreign shadow but remained a proud voice along the Congo River. The signing of the treaty was both a victory and a loss. It bought peace in the short term but opened the gates to colonization. Yet the Makoko's face, steady and unbroken, reminded his people that leadership was not only about victories. It was about carrying burdens, even the ones that weighed most heavily. As the Congo River carried canoes and stories downstream, the tale of the treaty spread. Some said the Makoko had secured his people's future. Others whispered that he had given away their freedom. Both voices were true, for the treaty was a blade that cut in two directions. Still, in the heart of the Teke, the Makoko stood firm, a commander caught between tradition and empire. He had signed with ink, but his spirit remained unbent, determined to guide his people through the storm that was only beginning. Chapter 7: The Weight of the Ancestors. The treaty had been signed, the French had gained their foothold, and yet the Makoko remained at the heart of his people's world. For the Teke, he was still more than a king. He was the living bridge between the ancestors and the living, the commander who carried both spear and spirit. His authority did not end with ink on paper. It stretched deeper, into the traditions that bound the Teke together. Every season, the Makoko led rituals to honor the spirits. The ancestors were believed to walk beside the living, guiding and protecting. Without them, no battle could be won, no harvest could flourish, no kingdom could endure. In the great courtyards of the capital, fires were lit and offerings laid before sacred shrines. Elders chanted, drummers beat rhythms that echoed the heartbeat of the earth, and the Makoko stepped forward to speak on behalf of his people. His face, painted with sacred markings, glowed in the firelight. His voice was deep, steady, carrying over the gathered crowd. He called upon the ancestors to bless their warriors, to protect the river, to guide the kingdom in times of uncertainty. The people listened in silence, their faith anchored in his words. To them, the Makoko was not just a ruler of men. He was a voice of the past, a guardian of the present, and a guide for the future. Even as French influence grew, the Makoko used these rituals to remind his people of their strength. He knew that the power of the Teke was not only in spears or trade but in belief. As long as the people believed, they would stand united. And as long as they stood united, no foreign flag could erase their identity. But unity required vigilance. Rivals still watched the Teke, and the French presence, though wrapped in promises, carried its own dangers. The Makoko continued to command his warriors, drilling them with discipline. He led them in exercises across the plains and forests, his spear raised high, his commands sharp and clear. When they ran, he ran with them. When they chanted, his voice joined theirs. His full face, visible at the head of the lines, reassured every man that their king had not retreated into palaces or papers. He was still their commander. The people told stories of these days. They spoke of how the Makoko would walk among the villages, listening to the concerns of farmers, traders, and mothers. He resolved disputes with patience, judged fairly, and reminded them that their loyalty to one another was their greatest strength. His leadership was not distant. It was personal. His presence made the people feel that the ancestors themselves walked with him. One story tells of a night when a storm rolled across the land. Lightning struck, rain poured, and fear spread through the village. Many saw the storm as a sign of anger from the spirits. The Makoko gathered the people in the courtyard, stood in the rain with his spear, and lifted his voice in prayer. The storm raged around him, but his face did not flinch, his voice did not break. By dawn, the skies cleared, and the people believed that their king had faced the storm on their behalf. Yet for all his strength, the Makoko was not blind to the pressures around him. French agents returned again and again, pressing for more land, more control. They built stations near the river, raised their flag, and introduced their laws. The Makoko resisted where he could, but he also knew that open defiance could bring destruction. He walked a narrow path, balancing diplomacy with quiet defiance, ensuring his people survived without being crushed. At night, when the fires burned low, the Makoko often sat alone, staring at the river. He thought of his ancestors, of the kings who had ruled before him. He asked himself whether they would judge his choices harshly or with understanding. He had signed the treaty, yes, but he had done so to shield his people from greater dangers. Was that weakness, or was it wisdom? Only the ancestors could know. The Congo River flowed endlessly, carrying both trade and tension. Along its banks, the Makoko's face remained the symbol of the Teke. His people still gathered when he called, still fought when he commanded, still prayed when he lifted his voice. In a world that was shifting under the weight of colonial ambitions, the Makoko carried the weight of history itself, the ancestors behind him, his people before him, and the shadow of empire pressing on all sides. The storm of Europe had only begun to break. And the Makoko, commander of the Teke, stood as both shield and guide in the gathering dark. Chapter 8: The River of Rival Powers. By the mid-1880s, the Congo was no longer a river of peace. It had become a battleground without swords, where maps, treaties, and flags fought as fiercely as warriors. For centuries, the Teke had ruled their stretch of the river, but now Europeans competed to seize it for their own empires. King Leopold of Belgium pushed hard, sending his agents deeper into the interior, promising gifts to chiefs and demanding signatures. The French, led by Brazza and his successors, raced to secure their position. Britain and Portugal watched closely, their eyes also fixed on the waters of the Congo. The river was no longer simply a lifeline for the Teke. It was the doorway to Africa's heart, and every foreign power wanted the key. The Makoko knew this storm could not be ignored. The treaty he had signed with the French was only one piece of a larger game, a game that stretched far beyond his kingdom. To the Europeans, maps were being redrawn in places like Berlin, where diplomats argued over Africa as though it were an empty land. But to the Makoko, it was not lines on paper. It was villages, farms, ancestors' graves, and the river that carried his people's soul. He did not surrender his duty. If the French claimed protection, then he would hold them to their word. He demanded respect for his people's trade and land. He called his warriors to keep watch on Belgian envoys who tried to enter Teke lands. On the plains, he rode at the front of his fighters, spear glinting in the sun, reminding all who saw him that the Teke were not pawns. His face, visible and commanding, carried the authority of a leader who would not allow outsiders to think the kingdom weak. In the evenings, councils grew tense. Traders spoke of new stations built by Europeans, where laws were written in foreign tongues. Elders warned that the ancestors would not forgive a king who let strangers seize the river. Young warriors burned with anger, eager to fight. The Makoko listened, weighing every word. He knew that open war with the French or Belgians could bring devastation, yet silence could invite slow domination. It was a struggle of patience, courage, and strategy. One evening, under the glow of torches, he addressed his people. His words were sharp, clear, and heavy with resolve. "We are Teke," he declared. "The river is our blood, the land is our flesh, the ancestors are our breath. No paper, no ink, no foreign tongue will erase who we are. If they come with respect, we will trade. If they come with deceit, we will resist. And if they come with war, we will fight." The crowd roared in agreement. Warriors struck their spears against their shields. Mothers lifted their children to see the king who still stood tall in a changing world. His full face, firm and steady, became a symbol of resilience. But beneath the strength, the Makoko carried doubts. He had seen how European rivalry could swallow smaller nations. He knew that no matter how strong his warriors were, guns and cannons could overwhelm spears. He had to think not only of pride but of survival. So he used diplomacy as his weapon. He played French and Belgians against each other, ensuring neither gained total control. He reminded them that the Teke were not passive subjects but active partners whose cooperation mattered. At night, when he walked along the riverbank, he watched the waters roll by. Canoes still carried traders, fishers still cast their nets, but the river no longer felt the same. It carried whispers of change, voices of far-off kings and foreign governments who thought they owned lands they had never seen. He wondered if his descendants would inherit a river still free, or one chained by foreign flags. Yet he did not allow despair to show. To his people, he was unshaken, their commander, their Makoko. He stood in front of his warriors during drills, leading their charges across the fields. He raised his spear and cried out commands, his voice ringing over the sound of pounding feet. Dust rose, shields clashed, and the sight of their king at the front filled the warriors with pride. The Congo River had become a river of rival powers, but in the heart of the Teke kingdom, one truth remained clear. Their identity, their unity, and their kings still held strong. The Makoko carried this burden not for himself alone but for every soul who lived by the river's flow. The storm of empire was tightening, but the Makoko had not yet yielded. The river still remembered its people, and as long as the Makoko stood with his face unflinching and his voice commanding, the Teke would not be forgotten. Chapter 9: Shadows of the Berlin Conference. In 1884, while the Teke people tended their fields and watched their canoes drift along the Congo River, decisions about their future were being made thousands of miles away. In Berlin, European leaders gathered around tables spread with maps. They argued, bargained, and carved up Africa as if it were a feast to be shared. Not a single African ruler sat in that hall. No Makoko, no elder, no warrior. The voices of the river were absent, yet their fate was being sealed. The Berlin Conference declared that any European power could claim territory in Africa if they occupied it. The Congo Basin, once the heartland of kingdoms like the Teke, became a prize on those maps. France, Belgium, and other powers divided the region with rulers and pens, ignoring the people who had lived there for centuries. When word of this reached the Makoko, he felt the weight of betrayal. The treaty he had signed with the French had been presented as a bond of friendship, a pact of protection. But in Berlin, the same treaty was used as evidence that France owned Teke lands. To the Europeans, the ink on that paper mattered more than the lives of the people it claimed to govern. The Makoko gathered his council. The elders sat with grave faces, warriors stood with tense fists, and traders recounted stories of new French stations rising along the river banks. The king listened in silence. He knew the truth: the era of equal diplomacy was ending. The French no longer saw the Teke as partners, but as subjects. Yet the Makoko did not bow to despair. He reminded his council that their strength still lay in unity. "The river is not theirs," he said. "The ancestors do not answer to their flags. We must endure, for our endurance is resistance." In the following weeks, the Makoko made his presence felt among his people. He traveled from village to village, walking with the farmers, standing among the fishermen, speaking directly to the young warriors. His face was seen everywhere, steady and unbroken. To see their king close to them gave the people courage. They whispered among themselves that as long as he led, the Teke spirit could not be stolen. Still, the shadows of Berlin were spreading. French administrators began to demand more control over trade. Belgian agents, though pushed back from Teke lands, stirred trouble in neighboring regions. The people felt the squeeze of foreign powers tightening, like a net cast over the river. In one decisive moment, the Makoko called his warriors to the fields for a grand assembly. Thousands gathered, shields raised, spears shining in the sun. He stood before them, lifted his spear high, and spoke. His voice rang out across the ranks. "We are not forgotten. We are not voiceless. This land, this river, this sky, all bear the mark of the Teke. The French may write papers. The Belgians may raise flags. But they cannot erase our blood, our songs, or our ancestors. Stand ready. Stand proud. For as long as we endure, we remain free in spirit, even when others claim our land." The warriors answered with a thunderous chant, pounding their shields in rhythm. Dust rose in great clouds as they marched and ran under his command. It was not a battle against Europeans that day, but a show of unity, a reminder to themselves that their kings still commanded them, still led from the front, still bore the weight of their history on his shoulders. But the Makoko also knew the danger of reckless war. He chose not to rush into conflict with France, for the guns and cannons they carried would devastate his people. Instead, he played a longer game, strengthening traditions, training his warriors, and teaching patience. Resistance, he believed, was not only about fighting battles. It was about refusing to let identity die. That night, as he sat by the river, he spoke to the spirits in silence. He asked the ancestors to guide him, to give him wisdom to protect his people in a world now ruled by foreign decisions. The Congo flowed endlessly before him, carrying both memories and fears. The river had seen kingdoms rise and fall, but it still remembered its people. And the Makoko swore it would continue to do so. The Berlin Conference had cast a shadow over Africa, but in the heart of the Teke, the flame of identity still burned. Their commander, their king, their Makoko, stood with his face unshaken and his voice strong, even as the world beyond their river tried to decide their fate without them. Chapter 10: Legacy of the River King. The final years of the 19th century weighed heavily on the Teke kingdom. The Congo River, once a highway of trade and tradition, was now covered with European flags. French posts rose along the banks, Belgian outposts pressed from the east, and foreign laws crept steadily into everyday life. Yet through it all, the Makoko remained the face of his people, their anchor in a time of upheaval. He had led them through battles, treaties, and storms of empire. He had carried the burden of choices no ruler before him had faced. To sign with the French had been both a shield and a chain. It preserved the Teke from Belgian conquest but invited French dominance. Still, the Makoko's leadership had kept his people united. Where other kingdoms fractured under pressure, the Teke still rallied behind their king. Everywhere he went, the people greeted him with songs. Farmers bowed, fishermen raised their nets, and warriors struck their spears against the ground in salute. His presence reminded them that their kingdom still lived, that their culture still thrived. His full face, calm and resolute, remained a symbol of resistance. He was no longer just a commander in battle but a guardian of memory. The Makoko spent his last years teaching his successors and elders the art of survival under foreign rule. He reminded them that strength was not only in war but also in patience. The river flows, he told them, and it remembers. So too must we. Empires rise and fall, but the people endure. In councils, he urged his leaders to protect traditions. The rituals for the ancestors continued, the drums still beat, and the chants of the Teke still rose to the skies. Children were taught the history of their people, not from foreign books but from the mouths of elders. Even as French influence deepened, the heartbeat of the Teke remained their own. The Makoko also continued to command his warriors, not for war but for pride. He drilled them in the fields, their chants echoing into the forests, their movements sharp and united. Foreigners might have claimed control on paper, but anyone who saw the discipline of Teke warriors knew that the spirit of the kingdom was not broken. The Makoko's presence at the head of these drills reminded his people that they still had a king who stood with them. In one of his last great gatherings, he stood before thousands of his people. The air was heavy with uncertainty, yet his voice carried hope. "We are the children of the river," he declared. "They may draw lines on maps, but they cannot draw lines across our souls. The river carries our songs, our strength, our ancestors. Let no man forget who we are, and let no child grow without knowing the pride of being Teke." The crowd erupted in chants, voices rising together like the roar of the river. In that moment, even under the shadow of colonial rule, the Teke felt their unity burn brighter than any foreign flag. As the years passed, the Makoko's health declined, but his presence never wavered. He continued to sit in councils, walk among his people, and lift his spear in ceremonies. When he finally passed, the kingdom mourned deeply. Drums beat for days, fires were lit along the riverbanks, and elders told stories of his reign. They remembered him as a warrior, a diplomat, a father, and above all, a commander who carried the weight of his people with dignity. His legacy lived on not in treaties or foreign archives but in the hearts of his people. The Congo River still flowed, its waters whispering the memory of the Makoko who had stood firm in an age of storms. Though the French claimed authority, the spirit of the Teke endured. Their king had shown them that leadership was not only about victories in battle but about guiding a people through trials that seemed impossible to bear. The Makoko's story became part of the river's story. Generations later, his name was still spoken with pride. His face, remembered by those who had seen him lead, was described to children as the face of a king who never flinched, never abandoned his people, and never forgot the ancestors. And so, the legacy of the Makoko remained, flowing like the river itself, unbroken, enduring, and eternal.